Are you sure you're ready for this, boy? Your first solo quest? It's a big deal, you know.
The old sorcerer was giving me a sad look, as if he could break into tears at any second. He reached out and straightened my robes, tugging on the fabric at the shoulders. I felt a bit more comfortable in the scratchy brown wool afterwards. I realized that it had been choking me slightly. I was reminded momentarily of my first day of school, my parents preening me as I stood waiting for the bus all those years ago. Ironically, I hadn't actually been to school in quite a long time. This was my school now. Xavier had arranged that somehow with his sorcery, convincing my parents and the school board that he was my new homeschool teacher. I'd been accepted into his highly competitive program since I was such a gifted student. I would have preferred Hogwarts. I'm ready, Xavier. And besides, this isn't my first time on my own. Remember when I got trapped in that other dimension for a few months? Alone? He made an annoyed sound from his mouth, which reminded me a bit of an old mule about to kick someone.
You're never gonna let me live that one down, are you?
No. I turned around to leave when he stopped me and called me back. What is it?
Let me see that wand of yours for a moment, he said.
I gave it to him reluctantly. You know I need that, right? He didn't say anything, just picked at the wood with his fingers for a second, then told me to hold out my hand. I did as he asked, and he grazed the wand against my outstretched digits. A moment later, I felt a terrible pain in my finger. Stung like a bee had just gotten me. What'd you do that for? He handed me the wand back, smiling devilishly.
You have a splinter of the all-world tree in your fingers now, boy. That means you have just enough magic to summon a portal back here if you ever become trapped in another dimension again. It's just enough for one trip, so use it sparingly. But now if you get defeated by Clint and he steals your wand, you could still survive.
I wanted to thank him, but then I thought about what this all meant. Why didn't you do this last time? Maybe if you'd done this before, I wouldn't have been stuck in that other dimension for all those months. His face turned a shade redder.
On your way. Good luck with Clint. He's an ice-cold son of a bitch.
Huh? I turned to ask him more, but before I knew it, he had summoned a swirling purple vortex which was suspended in the air before me. Then he shoved me rudely into it.
Nothing. Good luck, kid.
I heard his words echoing in my ear, fading off into the distance before cutting out abruptly as the portal closed. I fell hard on my back, landing in the snow. Immediately, I was freezing cold and shivering uncontrollably. What the hell, Xavier? It's like -30 in this dimension. You couldn't have told me to bring a damn jacket? There was nothing but silence except for the sounds of howling wind all around me and the crunch of snow beneath my feet. The mix of snow and hail which rained down from the dark gray clouds above bit into my fingers and cheeks. I remembered the hood on the brown apprentice robe that I had been given and pulled it up over my head, suddenly feeling much warmer. There was a pocket on the front as well, my favorite hoodie, so I stuck my hands in there and they were no longer cold. The apprentice robe was well insulated, and now only my feet felt frozen. The ice and snow seeping into my cheap running shoes. A huge ice-crusted castle could be seen ahead, and I began to run towards it as fast as I could, hoping that it would be marginally warmer inside. Smoke was rising from multiple chimneys, which indicated someone was home, and likely more than one person. The twisting turrets and spires of the ancient castle were frosted with ice and blue-tinged snow. It rose up higher into the sky than should have been possible, its peak lost in the clouds above. This is more like it, I said to myself, shivering. That Derek guy's hideout was a joke. This is some Game of Thrones shit right here. I finally reached the front door, and they swung open as I approached. The huge wooden planks which made up the doors were 10 times taller than me and twice as wide. A giant door knocker was mounted on each side, forged to resemble the faces of terrifying twin dragons. Wrought iron hinges and locks made the entryway look formidable, as if it could withstand a battering ram. I stepped inside and found myself in a huge stone-floored foyer in this intimidating castle. My footsteps echoed back loudly as I felt very exposed, as there were balconies above and a tall, winding staircase which led down towards me. Oil paintings and fine frames hung from the walls. Tapestries and suits of armor decorated the room, and heads of gargantuan animals were mounted everywhere on the walls and even the ceiling, as if there wasn't enough room on the walls for all of Clint's kills. Amongst the faces of animals from various dimensions, I saw people's decapitated heads mounted on the walls as well. Many, many people. Men, women, old and young. Why the hell had Xavier let me go after this guy first? He was a goddamn killing machine.
"Hey, punk,"
said a shadowy form which approached from the second floor, descending the stairs.
"I take it you're the new apprentice Brooke has been going on about. She's kind of obsessed with you. I'd be happy to give her one less thing to talk about."
That really caught me off guard. Suddenly, I'd forgotten about this battle for a second. Did Bruca actually like me? I mean, no girl has ever liked me before. I'd always thought that it was an act. She was only playing me to get to Xavier's key. Wait, she talks about me? Really? Before I could say anything else, he had his wand in his hand, and he was twirling it around and pointing it at the stairs beneath his feet. The surface of them turned into an ice slide and began riding it downwards towards me. Then he created a magical ice snowboard, which he rode with ease, hopping up onto the railing and riding down on them to greet me. I was so surprised by his approach that I had my wand lowered to my side, watching him in stunned fascination as he came towards me like a freight train. He began to accumulate ice and snow all around him, forming himself into a huge avalanche which was coming right after me. At the last second, I dove out of the way and collapsed the wall behind me with the shuddering impact of his blow. Stones fell from the ceiling and landed all around me. Luckily, not on me. Clint strode back into the foyer from the giant hole that he'd made in the wall. The cold air was rushing in behind him, but I saw that he had a warm-looking gray coat on, which appeared insulated from the weather. A thick hood lined with fur was pulled up around his face, shrouding his features in darkness. As he strode through the wreckage that he'd made, the hole began to seal itself back up behind him, the stones reassembling themselves into walls where there had only been air moments earlier. Before I knew it, the building was whole again. There was no sign of the recent disaster.
"It's a cold world we live in,"
Clint said, weaving his wand through the air menacingly.
"A cold, cruel world, isn't it?"
He paused, looking at me with his eyebrows raised.
"Hey, I just realized I don't even know your name. Sorry, mate. I'm Clint. Nice to meet you."
He stuck out his hand, and for a second, I almost reached out to take it instinctively, but I caught myself at the last second. No thanks. But he didn't stop approaching. He just kept coming at me.
"Ice form," he said.
He said aloud and began to glow faintly blue. A moment later, he turned into a liquid version of himself, like the T-1000, white steam pouring off of his shoulders and the top of his head. He was still coming towards me, moving fast like a football player coming in for a tackle. Terrified, I was instantly concerned of what would happen if I came in contact with him. Sub-Zero's ice clone attack came to mind. I remembered once in science class when a teacher brought in a container of liquid nitrogen and showed us some experiments with it, turning a rose into glass like ice, which would shatter into a million pieces if dropped. Then I pictured myself turning into that. Badly frightened, I did the first thing I could think to do. The first spell I'd been taught, aside from the lightning bolt, which I was sick to death of, I had vowed not to use it this time unless I really had to. It was a crutch more than anything. There was so much magic in all the World Tree, other than simply lightning. Plus it'd be the first thing Clint would expect. Xavier had spent time training me, and it was time to use that training. I clearly remembered the sand world. I pictured it in my mind's eye and imagined the heat of the sun, the stinging wind in my eyes, and then the sand in my shoes. A second later, I was rising up on a mountain of sand, brought through a portal made by a piece of the Old World Tree which I held in my hand. I did it! I did it! I couldn't help but yell, rising on a tidal wave of sand. I was excited, even though I was in the middle of a fight to the death. Clint ran into the sand, and I really didn't expect what happened next, since I had missed most of science class to apprentice with Xavier. Just imagine what you'd see if you threw a mountain of sand on a person made of nitrous oxide. His liquid blue skin turned to steam in an instant, and the sand all around him began to harden instantaneously. Xavier's former apprentice began to scream as he evaporated into the sand, turning into steam, and transferring his essence into 1 trillion individual grains all around him. My triumph was short-lived, though. As the mountain of sand began to grow higher and higher, and I realized I'd forgotten how to turn it off, Xavier had fixed this problem for me last time, but now I was on my own. Sand continued to pour out of my wand from the desert dimension, and I heard the Old World Tree in my mind crying out in pain and confusion. It hurt me just to hear it, and I realized that I was draining the essence of the other dimension and causing an imbalance. The entire multiverse was begging me to stop, but I couldn't. I didn't know how. Sandicus, Bacchus, Indica, Sativa, Crocus! I yelled, trying to remember the words Xavier had said to stop the flow of sand the last time. The flow of sand finally began to slow down and eventually stopped completely. But by the time I was up near the second floor balcony, elevated high on a mountain of sand, I started making my way down, sliding on my ass and trying not to build up too much momentum since there was a solid stone wall at the bottom. And Clint's wand. I could see it lying in the sand, pointing upward into the air like a trophy for me to collect. Practically salivating, I stood and began running down the sandy slope towards it. But just before I got there, a portal appeared and Bruca stepped out of it. She picked up the wand and held it in her hands, admiring it with her glowing purple eyes. I slowed down and dropped down into the sand to stop myself from running into her. About 20 feet from her, I stood again and regarded her, taking out my wand and readying myself for another battle. But she didn't want to fight me yet, I realized. She wanted to save me for last. You know, it's not too late for you and I to work together, she said, flashing me a look with those eyes. You're kind of doing my work for me anyway. I mean, we might as well make the partnership official. She took the new wand that she'd just acquired from Clint and held it up against her own. The two wands started bending and twisting and braiding themselves together like vines until eventually they settled and froze in place once again. Only now, as one. Bruca held up this new, much larger wand. It was twice as big as mine and twice as powerful, I imagined. So how about it? You know you're gonna lose. It's because I'm keeping you alive until the end doesn't mean that I'm interested in a fair fight. I'm gonna have a staff the size of Xavier's by the time this is all finished. I won't even need his key anymore. I'll have all the power I need. Bullshit, I said, more angrier than I intended. That key is the only thing keeping the multiverse together. You just want me to think it's not important, so I'll drop my guard. You've already shown your cards, Bruca. I know your game. She just smiled and turned, quickly spinning her now larger wand in a spiral and creating a swirling purple vortex in the wall. I thought she'd disappear into it without another word, but she surprised me by turning around and giving me one last shot at her. I decided that I'd make sure she regretted it. You know what the difference is between you and me? She asked cockily. Yeah, I said, surprising her. You're too full of yourself to realize when you're in trouble. I pointed the wand at her, and the wall of sand behind me created a massive fist the size of a transport truck. It hurtled towards her, and I saw her eyes widen with surprise as it was about to impact her, but then, at the last second, she ducked into the portal and disappeared. The fist made of sand collided with the stone wall and punched a huge hole through it, and cold air rushed in a moment later. I stood shivering in the freezing foyer of the castle once again. Sand was everywhere. And I realized I had ruined what had essentially been a really badass hideout that I could have claimed for my own. I'd been to the beach with my parents before. There was no way of getting sand out of the carpets. This fantastic hideout was completely ruined. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching today's video, or listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. We're at the hottest time of the year. I don't know how you guys deal with it, but for me, I like iced tea. And my wife sells tea, not the ice, but the tea part's there. The ice you can get on your own. Head over to etsy.com/shop/ivorymonocletea and check out some of the tea that my wife makes. There's even one that is my personal favorite. It's an incredibly strong tea called The Dark and Stormy Night, and if you ask, you can get a little dabbing MCP sticker that I made that she said would not look good on the bottle. And as always, I want to give a huge thank you to everybody who's out there on the Patreon, patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. So a big thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Stephanie Butler, Reaper61167, Bobby Karman, Tristain Pelton, Chance Burnett, Diana Kraus, Atomaurus, Grand Moth the Milky, Big Smoke 369, Michael Mcivor, Captain Scurvy, SaltyIrishPoet, Estebean, Brayden Morris, Nate Kuhl, HorrorFan1212, Our Insect Time, Kyle Resnack, David Martin, scare-ington the Unkempt, Robert Malcolm, Angelus, Spanky, Snoochie Boochies, Seclude, Lupita Galvan, That Creepy Chick, Tyler Fletcher, Merxenum, Red Shadowcat, Xavier the Cheyenne, Demix, Shawn Cadieu-baker, 6 Gay Rats in a Trenchcoat, Turtleman, Rob Like Sharp Things, Chaos Arts, Cryolinian, Xavier Graffius, Lord Life's Best, Goreng Trimagasi, Maria Walker, Emily Mitchell, Crazy Kid, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Ika Limchok, Dirt Diver 030, Matt Bach, Voice of Sand, Coffee Zombie, Hidden Tiger, Shelly J, Jeremy H, Psychomel, Nana, Deleted Account, Melted Lake, Tully Sue, William King, David Miver, Michael Ortiz, Satanic Aries, Bardo Hawk 764, Lambda M98, Harley, Sashi Suzaku, Cronut 509, Kaylee Ambrose, Suji Campbell, Stricken, Azarine Fox, Freddy Krueger, Happy Birthday Jason Wilson, Lisa Cottrell, Caspian, Hades Nephew, Tater Chip, Acid System, Prozac and Pancake Appreciation Society, Benjamin Welvert, Here with the Sloth, Fester's Lambshade, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, Rafael Rodriguez, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Paulson, and Corey Kenshin. My goodness, the list is getting long. But hey, I appreciate all of you. And to everybody who watches and subs and likes and leaves comments and does all those things, sweet dreams.